We will not rest till the storm is over. We will not lay this burden down.
I was inspired to be an activist by any number of things, probably before I was aware that I was an activist. I came up in a community of people in Philadelphia who, in many ways, were activists in their own right. I did not grow up in a family of people who were politically aware or who had any sense of going out to protest. These are people who are just living their lives, but the fact of being an African American in this society, the very fact that you can get through a day and that you can persevere kind of makes you an activist. These are people who taught me with both their actions and their songs that you had to be ready to deal. And but I think it really hit me when I began to travel as a musician, traveling around the nation. I'd had an experience of a race riot in my high school, so that kind of woke me up in 1968 that things weren't right in America. Before that time, I think I was kind of gliding on that issue of just preparing yourself to deal with every day. But when I saw all of these young people in my high school, young black people who were marching and sitting in, I thought, what the heck's going on here? And then I started to look around at the wider world and I began to see what really we were up against. But when I started to travel as a musician, I found out what it really was to be a person of color, what it was to be in a minority in America, people's reactions to me, how my very presence in a room would change the fabric of things, and then people's reactions to the songs that we were singing. It began to really anger me that everywhere I went, I had to deal with this. I had to deal with the oppression that had been part of, and doing the research that I did on the Underground Railroad and Civil Rights Movement, suddenly I was aware that this had been a very long struggle. But early in my career, I was at a conference, National Association of Campus Activities, which was where I was getting a lot of work those days. And one of the principal speakers at this conference was James Baldwin. Big surprise to me, I'd read a couple of his books. I knew who he was, basically. I didn't know the whole fabric of who he was. But I was just thrilled that he was there that night. And so he got up, and first he did this address. He talked to the students who were in the room, because there were about 1,000 students. And he told them that they had to really pay attention to education, and really great tag to the staff that had come with them. And then he turned to the artists in the room and he said, I understand there are lots of artists here, and I'm so happy to be in your presence. The role of the artist is to see the world in which you live, and then to take what you see into your filter and process it in the way that you do, through music, through art, through speech, through writing, and then show the world what you see. And at that moment, I was sitting next to a friend of mine. We were kind of like, oh yeah, that's what we do. And then he said, sometimes what you see are things that are hard, things that are dangerous, things that are not pleasant for people to deal with. When you see those things, it's your job to show them those things as well. And I thought to myself, that's not what I'm after. I'm trying to become rich and famous. And then he said, when you show them those things, people will not always love you for it. But that's your job. I knew in that moment that my life had changed, because I'd already seen things. And I hadn't put it into context that I could have and make a difference in what people were seeing. And I began to think about the things that were in my life that were causing me great pain. And a lot of that was the oppression and injustice in the world. I hadn't come to that point where I could think about really speaking to that. And that night started me thinking on the road. It wasn't long after that became part of a concert where Pete Seeger was the header. And I sat through a night of seeing Pete and all of these other social activists doing these songs, and I thought, there it is. I can do that. As I think about my life as an activist, think about the full range of things, there have been a lot of high points. I think meeting some of the activists, the people who kind of formed me, people like Pete Seeger, but also people like Rosa Parks. I got to spend about 30 minutes in a room with Rosa Parks. There was the 25th anniversary reunion of the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project, and it was at Brooklyn College in New York. And my partner Kim and I were invited to come and sing for them. These were people who had gone south to Mississippi in 1964, who had become leaders. James Farmer was there. Any number of folks that I later would understand to be an integral part of that summer. And Rosa Parks came that afternoon to give an address to all these people. This is the first time that many of these people in 25 years had come together. And of course, it had ended at a very tumultuous time when there was a lot of dissension in the movement, when whites were kind of pushed out of the movement. Black power was rising into the forum, and a lot of the black activists had felt that that they really kind of needed to wrest control of the movement away from the whites who were there, which came, of course, as a very painful thing. And that day, I heard a lot of that pain finally let out, and people talked about that dissension and talked about the fact that their passion for justice and particularly that summer had left a very bad taste in their mouth. And I understood that when you're working for freedom and justice and when you're active in the movement, things don't always go smoothly. And certainly, as I gathered, for example, on this one project that was brought up by Bill Harley, he gathered all of us together in the middle of the 1990s, and we were there to record some of the freedom songs. Cordell Reagan and Hollis Watkins, and so the original Freedom Singers, and a lot of the old heads were there, and a lot of us newbies were in the room. I remember the first night we sat in a circle, and Bill just kind of asked us all why we'd come. And so most of us were saying, well, we're here because we believe in freedom. We believe in justice. We believe in working for it. And in our minds, that's how we felt. But when it got to Cordell Reagan, who had been one of the original Freedom Singers and who had been one of those with Bernice and Chuck Neblett, and put their lives on the line singing these songs in Mississippi, Alabama, all of these places across the country, Cordell said, I want to know why y'all are really here. Because sometimes people latch onto these movements to get notoriety for themselves. And I'm kind of wondering if you're really committed to this movement in a real way. And I thought, what a rude question. I thought, wow, he's got a lot of nerve. And then I thought, wait a minute. Why am I here? It brought up a very important question for me. Because I was raised in a different time than those folks. They were formed in a cauldron of hate and of a time when opportunity meant that you could die. Going out to, as they did with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, going out to really be active and to protest against the Klan, they knew that this was a real life and death thing. I hadn't come to that realization yet. That for me was a changeable moment. It also meant that I had to start getting out on the streets, and I had to start singing at protests, and I had to not be so comfortable in my activism, to commit myself fully to what this might bring. I don't think I'd thought of that before. So over the course of years, the meeting of Rosa Parks, the meeting of other powerful figures in the movement, Harry Belafonte was one that I met the first time in an airport at 6 a.m. And I just had this brief moment of talking to him and being able to say to him, you are the reason I do what I do. I didn't realize it, but we had both been in Cincinnati to perform at the African American Museum there. And he had done this big speech, and and I had done a smaller gathering, but it was all about us being on the same page. I think about, powerful moments for me of traveling through Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee, but of also traveling through upstate New York and in Wisconsin, and having opportunities to tell people what our nation really has been about, the myth of our founding that has not really translated into freedom and justice and equality, to bring those messages to kids. I love the fact that I get to go into schools. I've been in thousands of schools and been able to bring the message of the Underground Railroad and the Civil Rights Movement, of the Birmingham Children's Crusade. My activism has taken mostly the form of education and talking about history. And I've had to face people who've come up to me at the end of a program and said, "You're trying to divide us. You're trying to make our country a place where people hate each other." And I say, no, what I'm doing is I'm inviting you into a relationship that's real. So I treasure the fact that as an educator and a historian, I've been able to use music in a way that really connects with people, that invites them to challenge the authority that has been misleading us all of these years. I think about the famous people that I've met, but each of them in their own way, at the time that we meet, has proven to me, and this is one of the great benefits I think that Pete Seeger gave me. It's not about me. To realize that I am one in a long line of people. I am a single voice that is part of an amazing, massive choir of people who have stood the test of time through song and through their living example of a way we could be. And I'm honored to be in that. I started my career out truly wanting to be known by everyone because they liked my music or they thought I was cute or for whatever reason, focused on me. Those folks taught me that serving the purpose of continuing that line of activism, continuing that line of commitment to justice is a gift to the world that is part of the extension. I'm part of those folks in the 16 and 1700s who sang "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around," who sang "Wade in the Water." But I now embody songs that also I've written or songs that have come about in a new time. I'm just really happy to be an activist. I'm happy to look around and see that in this time of 2021, that activism is on the rise, and that now we can use the technology and we can use our presence in a new way to inform people about what is possible in the world. And it is not over by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm looking forward to say, I know that these problems are not going to be solved in my lifetime. I know that I'm just playing my part, and I will pass on what has been passed on to me. I was raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My grandmother and grandfather migrated there from Virginia. They were part of the Black migration, which I grew up not knowing about. We were part of it. But I didn't know that 6 million African Americans were fleeing the South. I didn't know that we had come north because there was an opportunity for my grandmother and grandfather, and most of the family continued to stay in Virginia. But they came to Philadelphia and they started a new life. And along the way, I was born into this family. My grandfather was a car mechanic, worked for some of the rich families in Philadelphia, which gave him some leeway, some access, some cushion. And he saw a home he wanted and managed to buy the home on 17th Street in Philadelphia. I didn't know growing up that it had been an all-white area. I didn't know that we were the first family on the block to buy this house. I didn't find that out until I was in my late 20s. And I found out just through some conversations that were happening in the family. But there we were, we came into that property, as I found out later, because a woman named Juanita Kidd Stout, who eventually would become the first African American female Supreme Court justice in Pennsylvania. A woman who came by my house every now and then, usually about dinner time. And she would ring the bell, and my mother would go and answer back, and there'd be this explosion. My mother would run out, "Oh, it's so good to see you." And my grandmother would come out and we'd say, "Who is this woman?" They never explained her presence. And she would always look at my sister and I, and she would say, "Are you young people studying hard? That's the only way you're going to become something in this world." And we'd go, "Yes, we are. Yes, we are." It's like, yeah, right. Well, finally, it was described that she and a white realtor made it possible for them to buy the home behind the scenes. And when the white folks in the neighborhood found out that this family moved in, and then a couple other families, I guess, they all left. And white flight has happened in those days. So I grew up on this almost all black block because there was one Italian family that decided they were not troubled by these brown-skinned people moving in, and they stayed. As a matter of fact, when I moved away, they were still there. They died in their house. And there was a Jewish grocer across the street, and that was kind of the only the real indication that there was a wider world until I started going away into junior high school. I went to an integrated school. But my family mostly was in Virginia, and every now and then, every other summer or so, we'd end up going down to visit them. And in Richmond and Petersburg and Culpeper, I remember. And I had no idea in those years that our family history was contained in a very powerful way to the founding of America. I knew that we were slaves, or that my ancestors were, but I didn't realize that we could contact that history. And it wouldn't happen until about 1992 when one of my Virginia cousins did our family genealogy. And Kay Bush Gray, a teacher in Richmond, Virginia, she did a study on the family and getting stories from her mother and her grandmother. And then finally she went into historical records and did the whole 23andMe, Ancestry.com thing before they existed, of course. So she did it the hard way. And in a gathering that we had in 1992, a family reunion, as it were, she dropped this news on us that she had found out that the family had begun on a plantation called Hickory Hill in Ashland, Virginia. And she gave out these booklets, and we could see the Hickory Hill and the family tree and all of those things. And then she had a chapter about the Wickhams, the Wickham family, which was a powerful family that went back to the founding of the country. And as it turned out, Williams Carter Wickham, one of the descendants of that family, turned out to be my great-great-great-grandfather, because he'd had 6 children by one of the people in slavery, Bib Hanna. And of that union, as it was, my family was born. So she gave that information. And we were just, wow. I mean, the amazing connection to this powerful family that owned 250 some slaves. And so I took that booklet and all of that, and it stirred family stories. But now I had a context for the fact that I really, in the same way that the Hemings family with the Jeffersons was really connected to this division in America, this institution of slavery that just created the great sense of unequal participant citizenship. I knew that I was in that way also uniquely born to be a bridge builder. And I could feel in all of the years before when I did what my mother and so many people said, I just met people trying to make connection, trying to treat others with respect, regardless of race or color or background. I knew that feeling inside of me to bridge those gaps came from probably a very unique and qualified source. And I was already doing performances and talking about the Underground Railroad and talking about the history of people in America who stood up, those activists, those change makers. I felt legitimately licensed to be part of that group. Well, I didn't know that just a few years later, in 2010, I was going to get an opportunity through teaching a course at a summer camp to actually make contact with the Wickham family. But on a Wednesday afternoon, when I shared my story with a class that I was teaching, that contained one of the students who was a storyteller and a woman who had grown up in North Carolina, but who had become friends with Lisa Wickham from that family. She came up after I shared this information in the class and she said, "You're related to the Wickham family." I said, "Yes." She says, "Well, I'd like you to know that I know that family. And I haven't thought of Lisa in 30 years, but I can't believe. I'm going to try to find her and I'm going to tell her your story. And if I find her, are you interested in making contact?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." Never thinking that she would actually be able to do it. And it was a year and a half later that she emailed me and said she'd found Lisa and that she told my story to Lisa. And Lisa said, "I want to talk to him." So she said, "Here's Lisa's number. You can call her." And I did. And we had a reunion. We over the phone first, and then eventually a year later, I went to Richmond and I met Lisa. I met her sister Wallace. And since that time, we have been in contact with each other, embracing each other as cousins. Before it finally became impossible to do, we actually went to the property and walked on the land together of Hickory Hill and had a day where we experienced our history together, but opening ourselves to a new relationship in these present days where we can use our history to reach out and be part of the change in America. And even thinking now, in about a week or so, I'm actually going to go to Maine and have about 3 days with Lisa and continue this journey that, again, is not a finished product. You know, often when I tell the story in public, people think, "Oh, how nice it is that you met and now you're family." We're working on becoming family. We're working on overcoming that history of oppression and of the unequal journeys that we've had in this life. But we're working from the standpoint that we do not have to be defined by that history in our acknowledgement of it. And I'm grateful to have this growing relationship with my Wickham relatives and in bringing them together with some of my Hewlett family relatives. I think this is the future of America, facing the difficulties of not being in the same place and slowly closing the gap. One of the great things that's come out of that is that the Wickhams, as a result of our conversations, on their side, established a scholarship for students in Virginia to reach out and give back some of what they've gained in this landscape of change. I'm a walking example of what is possible. I will say that in this time, presently, I have, for the first time, begun to get a taste of what it is to be an activist in the way that the old line folks did. I have never felt less safe in this country. And I have never felt less safe traveling and doing the performances that I do, which are to openly acknowledge and name the oppression and to encourage people into the activity of taking it on themselves and facing the consequences of what might happen as a result of that. But I know, perhaps because I've been doing it for years, because I know that I don't do it alone, and also because I know that my life was made possible by those folks who came before me. And so this is my give back to the mission that they started and that I'm trying to continue. I wear a turtle because in the 90s, I did some work with the American Indian movement. And we were largely around sacred sites and the fact that many of them were being overrun as tourist attractions and just a general sense of disrespect for Native peoples and their faith traditions and their presence in our country. But the turtle came to me in 2008. I had a liver transplant. after 13 years of liver illness, I was about a week and a half away from dying. And I was in the hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania Hospital, hoping, praying for a liver, which was the only thing that would save me at that time. And fortunately, on October the 29th, one of the liver surgeons walked into my room and told me that they had found a liver. They were going to go check it out. It was in Delaware, and it turned out to be compatible with me, and they put that liver in. The surgeon said, we put it in, and it pinked right up. And he said, it's a good liver. And it has been an amazing liver. I've only had one issue of rejection in 12 years. And but in the second year, in 2009, when I was still recovering, and I hit a plateau, and I just, in healing, sometimes you hit a plateau, and sometimes problems creep in. But for me, it was mostly mental. It was emotional. I hit a depression, and I was having trouble just kind of getting through every day. And I called a friend of mine, and I said, I need a miracle. And he said, you just had one of the biggest ones that any human could have. You got a liver. And I said, oh, yeah. He said, you need to look for smaller miracles. You need to find something to remind you of the miracle that you've had. Not only just the miracle of getting the liver, but everything you've learned through this process. I said, okay. So I went in town that day, and I went to this little arts shop in town, Artists Collective. And I was looking around. I was actually searching for a gift for someone else. And I looked in a cabinet, and there was a carved sea turtle that was made out of deer antler from a local artist. And I said, could I see that? It was just struck me. And they gave me that little turtle, and I held it in my hand, and suddenly I just felt this peace. And I remember the work that I had done with the American Indian movement, and going into a sweat lodge, and of the turtle being the symbol of the beginning of the earth, the creation, and of the turtle being an icon of slow movement, and just remembering to take every moment for what it's worth. And I thought, well, maybe that's it. So it was on a chain. I put it around my neck, and every day since then, I've gotten up to put on a turtle to remind myself of what I had learned, and to remind myself to take things slow. And so that has really guided me. And, particularly in my work with the Living Legacy Project, the organization that I now have become co-president of. It started just as me being asked to come on a bus of some people who were leading people on civil rights pilgrimages. And that was in 2010. They were leading these pilgrimages to introduce people to the civil rights movement who didn't know about it, or to reintroduce people, taking them to the sites of the civil rights movement in Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee. And just not a tourist event, but to really go to these places, to talk to the people in the communities, to hear the stories, often stories that you don't hear or you don't read in the textbooks or newspapers. And the thing that they were missing was that they didn't have any of the authentic music. And so somebody asked me, they said, I know that you do this music. I said, sure. So I went on that journey, and essentially I was there to kind of reacquaint myself, but also to get paid. Musician, I got to make money. So I thought, okay, it'd be 1 week, and I will do these songs, and I will tell people how the songs were used in the civil rights movement. By Wednesday, when we stopped at 3 or 4 or 5 and 6 of these amazing places in Alabama, in Birmingham, going into Kelly Ingram Park, where children had been attacked by the police, going to the Civil Rights Museum there, going to the 16th Street Baptist Church, crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, I found songs to illustrate and highlight all of those moments. But it was when we were standing in Mississippi in front of the dilapidated store where Emmett Till went in and made contact with Carolyn Bryant, which of course cost him his life. I was standing in front of that store, and this spirit came over me, and I began to sing the song, "Oh Lord, How Come Me Here," which is one of the early spirituals. I wish I'd never been born. Just thinking about the fact that Emmett Till, I could have been Emmett Till of the many times in my life when I've been in situations, either with police or in neighborhoods. I had one friend that I visited his home in Philadelphia, and after we went off on a little excursion, around Philadelphia, his mother got a call saying, "If that N word ever comes to your house again, we're going to break out every window and burn your house down." There are so many of those stories, and I realized that I've really been blessed to get through all of these times. And I shared that on that journey. One of the places that we have gone on those journeys is the offices of the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, which was started by Brian Stevenson a few years ago. And about 5 years ago, that organization built a museum called the Museum of Peace and Justice, and then instituted the lynching memorial about 5 blocks away. And so we take our people there, and this is the symbol for that memorial. I wear it as many days as I can because people don't understand how many people have been lynched in this nation for reasons of civil rights and for no reason at all. And I realized that this journey that I've been on has been one that has been in some way protected by those angels, both with the turtle and with the songs that I sing. I realized that I have been given a gift of those songs, which contain so much power, which, as people stood and were attacked, as C.T. Vivian in standing on the steps of the City Hall in Selma, pointing his finger in the face of Jim Clark, saying, "We are willing to be beaten for democracy." I never thought I would have the power in me to put myself into those positions. But in 2015, when I was part of 70,000 people going across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a bridge I had already crossed 10 times. But that day was just a really special day. And I think about all of these experiences and all of the various opportunities I've had to make contact with those change makers that came before me. And on that day, walking across that bridge, I realized that I had put myself now firmly in the sights. And as the elders would say, I've come too far to turn back now. So I realized that over time, the courage has been built step by step. And so I take my turtle, I take my symbols, I take my songs, and I move forward knowing that if in fact something does happen, if I am beaten for democracy, if I am killed in the line of fire from protesting for better jobs or for voting rights or simply for the right to exist on a daily basis, that I am one of a long line of people. Fannie Lou Hamer said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." Well, because of her, I have more energy. Because of her, I have more wisdom. Because of her, I have more courage. So I wear these symbols every day, and they're conversation starter. I love walking on a plane and going down the aisle and having people look at this symbol or look at my turtle and say, "Hey, what's that mean?" And I say, "Oh, so glad you asked." My life has become a "so glad you asked" opportunity every day. Whenever I have the opportunity to connect with young activists these days, the first thing I think to myself is, hallelujah. I'm so glad for you. Thank you for waking up and for embracing this struggle. And their stories are always different, the reason that they came to it, as my story is. I say to myself, I'm one of the most reluctant activists I could possibly meet, coming from where I come from, an evangelical Black Baptist church that really didn't get involved in activism, didn't get involved in civil rights, just thought everything was about getting people saved and sending them to heaven. Uh, and then of my own background, again just being really focused on getting yourself right in the world. I realized that also prepared me for reaching out to other people. It gave me a voice that I didn't know how I was going to use. But when I encounter young activists, the first thing I think is don't get in their way, because they're bringing an energy that, as you get older, you see the world, their perspective, builds and changes, but we come with a lot of baggage, those of us who've been at this for a while. And some of that is wisdom, but some is a thought that certain things can't be changed. And I think one of the great benefits of youth is you think everything can change. And so a lot of the activists, they plunge out there, and we need that energy. So I don't ever want to discourage that energy, but I also want to remind them that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, that many of these issues have been taken on by wise minds and willing bodies years before we ever came on the scene. And there's lots to learn from all of those old heads. So I think the best thing in this movement is that we collaborate, is that we each give some of what we have to give. And if I can be somewhat a tempering or a wisdom providing entity in their lives, I do that. But first, I always try to remember to listen and breathe, and only to offer what I think in that moment might be useful. I would say something to young activists that was said to me, and this came from several sources in the civil rights movement. Never underestimate the importance of keeping yourself healthy. Many of the folks in the civil rights movement, as I would talk to them, would say, we didn't take any days off, and we didn't remember sometimes to just go have fun. And it burned us out. And it also meant that we turned against each other because we didn't always realize that our way was not the only way, and that we had to make space for other people. And I think the importance of regenerating yourself and of stepping back to get a different perspective on what's happening is always very important. And I think the last thing I would say is C.T. Vivian in 2015 was one of the principal speakers for the conference that my group, the Living Legacy Project, put on. And he said some very powerful things, but one of the things I came away with, he said, in the civil rights movement, those of us who are working for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we didn't feel that we were working against something. We were working for something. We were working for love, and we were working for justice. And we always tried to keep that in mind, because when you're working against, then the energy that you're consuming is filled with hate and is filled with disappointment. We always believed that we were moving forward to something that people would eventually realize benefited them too, even our enemies. We knew that we were working for love, and we knew that good leadership was important, so we always took time to plan. And at that same conference, Reverend William C. Barber said something that I took away, which was, when you're working to build a movement, you want to be very careful to always leave room in your heart for the transformation of those you oppose. Because if in fact you don't leave room for transformation and for the change of those you are opposing, you will eventually become what you hate. Those principles are very much a part of what I do.